Welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. And this week, Russians in space! Well, what else is new? We're talking with Dean Page! Cue the music! Hello there, Capers, and as I said, welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. My name's Scott James Merridew, and this is the show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics, joined each week by a very special different guest. Today's guest is a writer in the independent comic scene. We're very glad to have him on. Give it up, Capers, for Dean Page! How you doing, Dean?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing very well on this very sunny Edinburgh day.
Nice.
I'm not used to that.
Yeah, we must have your rain today over here in Jersey.
Well, in fairness, we have rain over here. It just lasts about 10 minutes and then goes away, then comes back in another hour, then goes away again, with sunshine in between. Where it's been fucked up right now. But then it's been fucked up all over Europe. We've got record heat waves all over the place. It's getting absolutely mental around here.
Yeah, here too. It's been really hot, up in the hundreds.
Up in hundreds? My goodness. How are
well,
you
we use Fahrenheit.
Oh, of course, yes. I'll be honest. Okay, so I say it's really hot around here. Highs of 21 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it's not a lot. Very different vibe.
Sure. It's so hard to convert to. It's not an easy one.
I don't know. Why do you even use Fahrenheit? What is the point of it?
Well, the idea, I think, is that so for Celsius, it's based on water, right?
Yeah.
So zero is freezing.
0 is freezing, boiling is 100.
And I guess Fahrenheit
it's a universal thing.
Is somehow more human-centric, like what feels comfortable, maybe? I have no idea what Fahrenheit's based off of. Because freezing is 32. Freezing's 32.
32. That seems just like a random number. Because I know why some things are different in America. Like I know why you guys don't spell colour with a letter U. And it's purely because of capitalism, because people didn't want to pay a newspaper advertisers.
Is that seriously it?
Yeah, they used to pay for adverts in newspapers by the letter, and so they just dropped occasional letters here and there. And it's caught on.
I'm surprised we didn't do night, just like how they do it on like a McDonald's commercial, just like ITE, instead of IGHT.
I mean, some things caught on more than others. I think the McDonald's thing is more of a recent thing, and it doesn't have catch on. I guess McDonald's doesn't have the staying power that 1700s newspapers did.
Oh. Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, we're newspapers today. Which also, kind of, connects with comics, too, because, people try to think, oh, it's just comics. Some people say it's comics versus manga or whatever you want to say. And, the reality is it's like print.
Yeah.
There's a print apocalypse, right? Because there's digital to compete with it. And, that's just something you have to consider.
There's a lot of apocalypses going on right now.
Yeah, we're kind of juggling.
Oh, dear. I mean, printers is not completely dead over here in the UK, but it's certainly struggling. I don't know what it's like in the US. I imagine it's bad.
I see stores closing, even Barnes and Noble, which is the big bookstore chain. I see fewer of them now, and I see ones closing down.
So we don't have the same bookstores that we had when I was growing up, but still quite a few, like W.H. Smith's or Waterstones, people like that. They're still around, still hanging on. But I'll be honest with you, I haven't been to a bookshop in years. I get all of my books off of not Amazon, but other smaller websites.
Right.
And they're great because you get lots of secondhand books, which is great because you get that book smell.
Well, but what I feel like we miss, though, with having bookstores, or even we used to have video stores, right, where you'd rent a video to watch.
Oh, those are the days.
Stumbling on something that you weren't looking for, something that maybe just catches your eye. I think that, I don't know how they could incorporate that into digital a little bit better. They try to give you recommendations and stuff like that, but
it's stupid really recommendations. No, it's not the same. And you can, with the internet, you can immediately look up reviews of the thing that maybe pops up in your feed in your recommendation list or something, and you instantly know whether you like it or not. And so it's not that much of a gamble. So it's less rewarding when it turns out to be something good.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's more rewarding when there's the risk, and and then there's the social element. I used to love going to video stores and bookstores and getting to know like somebody that works there, and like not necessarily being their friend, but getting a sense for like what they like.
You knew Carl, the video salesperson,
right? And you're like, I'm looking for something that's kind of like this, and you're like, I like this movie, and they're like, ooh, well, then you might like this, and they go grab something else for you. And but nowadays, when they employ people at those stores, they usually just get like people that don't know anything about that. It's just someone looking for a job, and then they're not helpful. Like Best Buy, we have like a technology store, Best Buy, and like you go there and you're trying to ask them stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I just work here for. I just
what are you looking at me for? I just work here."
I'm like, that's why I'm here and not online. Because I want to talk to someone and like understand it.
Need the human element. Give me something.
I know. We're losing that human element.
Well, we've got a bit of the human element in a lot of your comics. I've been reading quite a few of them. And frankly, I am super, super intrigued. And we are going to get into all of that. Before we do, give me the elevator pitch of you, Dean. Who are you? What do you do in this world?
Me, I'm a middle school teacher. I work with students with like behavioral and emotional disabilities. Usually they can't be at the public schools for whatever reason. And there's so many different reasons. And so my class size is real small, like 4 kids, sometimes even 2 kids, 6 kids. And, it's not a backbreaking job in the physical sense, but like it's very emotionally.
The emotional labor is high.
Yeah. And very rewarding. I love what I do.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Again,
do
it's the gamble, it's the risk reward thing. It's huge highs, as well
like,
it should be.
There's people doing comics because they want a way out. Maybe they want to weigh in. For me, it would be cool to write comics full time, but like I love teaching. I couldn't see myself stopping.
Why limit yourself to one thing?
Right. And I do summer school jobs and stuff and summer camps and stuff. But I have summers off as a teacher, so if I could fit in going to Comic-Cons and stuff like that, would promote it. But when you only have like one book, it's kind of hard to justify the expense of a booth or a table to try to just sling one book. So that's why
it depends on how good the book is.
Well, I just feel like I'm only going to get a certain amount of people coming to me. And if I can only sell them one book, that's less money I can get to pay for the table. Sure. So it's like if I have like 4
books.
Red
emotional rewards, low fiscal ones.
Yeah. And I would love going. I mean, once I started my first Jake Sunrise book, I was like, all right, let's start looking at the cons. All right, when are they? And I started making a list of when they are. And then I started looking at the fees and I was like, oh. I forgot I have to pay for a table.
That is not an encouraging graph.
Right? And some of them are super expensive. But I mean, luckily I'm in New Jersey, so I'm near some pretty good cons around here.
I hear that. I hear that in like outside of New York, there are lots of small, more independent or less independent, but still interesting comic conventions, which is kind of similar here in Scotland. We also have, I haven't been to one in years because of COVID and things like that and regards to my life, but in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, we often have smaller conventions that are an awful lot of fun. And that's coming from someone that doesn't really like crowds that much.
It's the hardest thing about having like a geek fest of any kind is that we don't really like being around a lot of other people.
I want to meet so many people that like the things I do, but I don't want to be near them.
Right. And so it's really tough to kind of square that circle. I used to go to conventions as a kid in New Jersey. My dad would take me up he'd entertain me. He wasn't into comics, but he would take me up to New York City. And that was right when Image started. So I got to meet like Rob Liefeld. I got to meet like Eric Larson a few times. My favorite indie comic growing up was ElfQuest.
I know I've read that. I know I've read ElfQuest.
It's an amazing series. It's just a woman and her husband, and I think she probably does even 90% of the writing. She's the artist, but I think she also does most of the writing, and he kind of just helps her organize it and kind of bounces ideas back and forth. And they did a color version that was printed by Marvel. But beyond that, they just had their own label. And they just did it black and white. At the beginning, the original ones. I never read the original ones because they were like the Conan the Barbarian size. I don't know what that's called. That's like the slightly bigger comic format.
I know what you mean. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I don't know how to translate it.
I used to love that size as a kid because it was just different and it was big, but it wasn't like too hulking huge. And it was the same kind of paper and stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I loved ElfQuest growing up, and I got to meet them at these conventions and stuff. So, I mean, I would love to go to conventions. That could be.
Well,
really
if you
fun
ever make
someday.
your way over to Scotland, there's a convention going on, just sneak around the back and set up a table. I'm sure they won't stop you.
Yeah, you know, and Jersey's like the most densely populated state in America. So I mean,
Really?
yeah, and it's a tiny state, so you can
I
find
knew that.
comic stores. There's a good amount of comic stores, like every.
There's the
You know,
one that's
20, 30
owned by
miles.
Kevin Smith, right? Like,
I went there the other day. He had an event. Where did I
Ooh.
put it?
you've got something.
I got Daredevil #1. And then I got him to. It's in black, but I got him to sign it down here.
I can see. Oh, it's been touched by the Smith.
Yeah, and I mean, he was only. You know, he grew up like close to where I grew up, like 5 minutes away. Like we grew up right around this. I'm just a few years younger than him. You know, like maybe 5-10 years younger. And
You could have been walking by him making Clarks, and you wouldn't know the difference.
yeah. I mean, my older brother's friends, like were friends with his friends. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow.
so it's so cool to see somebody
So
that like
Jersey's the
I
most
grew up
densely
kind of
populated
looking up
city,
to.
and yet everyone knows Kevin Smith.
Yeah. And it's like, but it's funny because he doesn't act like a celebrity to me. I mean, not that I've really met many celebrities, but to meet him, he's just like, hey, how's it going? You know, like, he's just like, what are you up to? You're like, I'm here to have you sign it. You know, and he's just like real down to earth because like we got guys like Jon Stewart lives probably 5 minutes away from where that store is.
Oh, wow.
John Bon Jovi lives right down the street from there.
Holy shit. You say you haven't met a lot of celebrities. You appear to be living in a neighborhood full of celebrities.
Well, they have their big houses. I've never been in there. I don't go to their neighborhoods very much unless I was like delivering a pizza or something.
Honest, that rarely happens over here, but something did happen because basically on my day job, I'm a tour guide.
Okay.
And one of my on the open top buses here in Edinburgh, awful lot of fun. You should check them out. But one of my other colleagues, who was a tour guide, was talking about this TV series called Rebus, based on this character called Inspector Rebus, police officer, based on this series of novels, the Rebus novels, by this very famous author from around here called Ian Rankin. And as we're talking about Ian Rankin, they see Ian Rankin walking down the street right next to the bus, and like, oh, by the way, talking about Ian Rankin, there's Ian Rankin right now. Hi, Ian Rankin. And it's one of those bizarre moments that very rarely happens around here. And it's honestly, I'm going to say this, Ian Rankin is kind of like, you know, he's like almost like the Scottish Stephen King.
Oh,
Or
cool.
like, well, maybe that's the Edinburgh Stephen King at any rate. He's very popular around here. He's very well known around here. A long series of thriller novels, and there was a TV show based on it. It's a whole thing. But stuff like that can happen occasionally. Apparently, he just took it all in stride and just waved and said, "Hi, everybody," and kept on walking his dog or something.
I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're people. They're people. They walk
they're
their
just
dogs.
people.
It happens.
Hopefully nobody harasses them and everyone's pretty chill and relaxed about it. Because so many people live in New Jersey, there's a lot of celebrities from here, you know, like Danny DeVito, stuff like that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Jack Nicholson, I think, too.
Oh,
and it's just like, that's just because there's so many people here. Frank Sinatra. It's just, Jersey has so many human beings that they're bound to have some famous ones here and there.
In Edinburgh, pretty much all we've got is Maggie Smith, because she made a film around here, Ian Rankin, and to my everlasting shame and regret, J.K. Rowling.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she's not even from here. She just made 2 books here and drives now about a third of our tourism. Yay.
Oh, she lived there when she wrote them?
Wrote the first one, the very last one. She wrote the first one in a cafe around the corner on right next to the statue of Greyfriars Bobby, very famous dog from around here. And she wrote the last one in a fancy suite in the Balmoral Hotel, where not a couple of months ago, Beyonce just stayed.
Oh, wow.
So,
jeez.
yes, it was very much a rags to riches to transphobic story.
Yeah. Not always
I'm not
good.
going to go into that. We're not going to get into that.
Somehow the riches leads to that sometimes, it seems.
It's funny how that happens, but we've got plenty of other great stuff to talk about with all your comments. Can't wait to talk about it. Before we do, we're going to talk about the news. So we just talked about a bit about comics. Let's talk about some great comic news. Jennifer Garner apparently is returning as the character Elektra in the new upcoming Deadpool 3. An actor and a character that did not get their due in the early 2000s. Barely got their due in the TV show from a couple of years ago. But yeah, it's nice to see her come back and maybe get another shot at that.
Yeah. I mean, I wish they could have... I don't know why they don't have a Greek person play it. That's always been my big question.
I mean, they didn't even get a real ginger to play Daredevil in that film, so...
That's true. He is a redhead. I forgot about that.
Yeah, he's full-on ginger, and they just gave Ben Affleck a mild tint of red.
Oh, that was awful. I think that was a wig. Or at least a piece.
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me.
If you look at it, it was like that. That was around the time when I was like, is he bald? I was like, is that a hairpiece? I can't tell, man. Looks really fake. Did they do anything to Charlie Cox's hair?
Again, a little bit, yes. Because he's like a natural brown hair, and they did a little bit to it. It's not full ginger. It's not like Dominic Monaghan. No, I don't mean Dominic. Who's the guy who plays the character from the Star Wars video games, and it was also in Shameless?
Which character from the Star Wars video game?
The Cal Kestis character.
Beard?
Not the guy with the beard, no. Anyway, it's not Dominic Monaghan who was in Lord of the Rings. Anyway, I can't think of another ginger actor. Jesus.
I was thinking there was that. Who was the brother of the guy? And I don't know if you ever saw the show Ray Donovan.
I know of it. I know that's the one with fucking
Wolverine, whatever.
Not Wolverine. Sabretooth.
Sorry, Sabretooth. You're right.
Liev Schreiber.
He's also the reboot of the Manchurian Candidate, or the remake, not reboot.
But they've already done a remake of that, so it's the third remake.
Well, it was in the 90s. No, he was in the one with Denzel Washington.
Oh, so maybe that was the remake.
I think that was it. He was the.
Okay. I thought you were talking about an upcoming thing.
No, he was the he was the actual Manchurian Candidate.
I see. Okay.
Oh, Bunchy. This guy who plays Bunchy's got like the right color hair. But I don't know if I mean, I wouldn't see him playing the role, but he's got the right color hair for it. That like strawberry blonde kind of reddish.
Well, speaking of miscasting, they've just dropped the trailer for the new Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory prequel, just called Wonka, starring Timothy Chalamet as Willy Wonka.
Who's Timothy Chalamet?
I don't know how to say his actual name.
No, who is he?
He's the guy from Dune.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Why would they do that?
It gets better.
Because he was so funny in Dune.
Yeah, but I haven't got. But here's the thing. They've also cast an actor to play an Oompa Loompa. They show at the very end of the trailer. Guess who plays the Oompa Loompa?
Peter Dinklage?
No.
Oh God, is it the same actor? Is it Timothy Chalamet?
No. I'll give you one more guess.
Jack Black.
No,
that would have been good.
That would be hilarious. I love that, but no, Hugh Grant.
Oh come on, are you? That's not real.
I am 100% serious.
I'm looking up pictures of this right now. This sounds awful.
You go look it up. Look it up.
He was too tall to play Wolverine. Oh no.
Yeah.
Upgrades, people! Upgrades!
This is something that's really happening. Honestly, that's the least egregious thing about it. The most egregious thing about it, the trailer I've seen, is that Timothy Chalamet's performance, at least in the trailer, he is... Let me put it this way.
Or wait, Hugh Grant. I was thinking Hugh Jackman.
Oh my God, no.
That's even worse.
I wonder why you made the Wolverine reference.
Yeah, that's why I said Wolverine. Hugh Grant, oh my Lord. I'm looking at the face of it right now. It looks...
It's nightmare-inducing.
Yes.
I think he's at the point in his career where he's willing to say yes to anything, and a lot of people are throwing some really silly ideas at him.
He's like, I guess, what did he do? Just stand in front of a camera and they just caught his face? Just face capture?
Yeah, it's CGI. They didn't put him in, like, orange makeup, I don't think.
No, those aren't his hands, maybe, I don't think, right?
Yeah, and...
Oh, God, this is so awful.
But Timothée Chalamet's performance, I mean... So, original actor... Oh, now I can't remember his name. I'm having a really bad day with names today. Original actor played Willy Wonka.
That was... Oh, no.
Now, my brain keeps coming up with Gene Shalit, and that's not it.
Gene Wilder.
Gene Wilder, that's it.
There it is.
Right, so Gene Wilder, okay. Performance as Willy Wonka, it's great because he's kind of kooky and weird. You don't really know what he's thinking, and it's a mass performance. Then you've got... Johnny Depp's performance, and he's very much playing a very weird, very off-putting character. But you don't necessarily believe that performance, but it's very much something that you can accept. Then you got Timothée Chalamet's Shamalama Ding Dong, whatever you call it. His performance in the trailer for Wonka, and he acts like a guy who's been told he needs to act like a slightly kooky guy. Like it very much reeks of an actor trying to appear quirky, and he's just not. He seems very uncomfortable with it. It's not believable at all, and it's very weird. The rest of the trailer, aside from the Oompa Loompa Hugh Grant, looks perfectly fine to me. I am not adverse to a Willy Wonka prequel. That sounds kind of cool, but yeah, it's a very, very weird series of castings.
I almost wonder, like, if you're going to do a prequel about it, what is it, like how he got his Oompa Loompas or something?
How he got his chocolate factory. It's him competing with other people making chocolate, and it's like, oh, my chocolate makes you fucking float, and shit like that.
I mean, it's a different time period, right? Like, today, people are going to be thinking about, like, where chocolate really comes from and all of the child slavery involved and how the Oompa Loompas are kind of like little... like he's like did he capture them? Do they work for money?
Well, in the original book by beloved children's author Roald Dahl, who was also, get this, a fucking spy.
Yes!
He spied on then President Eisenhower successfully. Eisenhower did not know that the guy in his office was Roald Dahl. Fucking Welsh/Norwegian, whatever it is, guy who also worked for the RAF, who came up with the idea of gremlins.
Like on planes or the TV or like the movie?
No, he came up with the idea on planes, and the movie got that idea from him.
Did he think they were real, or he
no?
Was
He was working in propaganda in the RAF.
Oh, awesome!
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not going to go down a Roald Dahl rabbit hole. Anti-Semitism, anyway. But in the original book by him, Willy Wonka explains how he went to Oompa Loompa Land and saw how they were being savaged by Venetia's canids and other things. So he says, hey, why do you come and live with me? In your home? No, in my factory. And that's in the book. So...
You know, I've been reading through Journey to the Center of the Earth, and like in the first chapter, you find out that the main character, he works for his uncle, and his cousin, the daughter, is his fiance. And like, it's 1926, and it just kind of like, it's normal. There's no like, yeah, I know she's my cousin. There's nothing like that.
If it's good enough for Teddy Roosevelt, it's good enough for us.
Right? I mean, geez, Rudy Giuliani, New York's mayor, was married.
Oh, I didn't. Oh God.
That's not even that long ago. Was married to his cousin.
Oh, that's so weird. Because in the UK, at least, that fell out of style pretty damn quickly. The only person I could think of within recent history who did that was Charles Darwin.
Yes, that's true.
That's basically it. So yeah, the Wonka trailer, I'm reserving judgment until the film comes out.
The costume's cool, if I want to say something good. It looks like, I like the outfit, but it looks like it could be in a Batman movie.
It's
and it's almost indistinguishable from the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, the top hat thing, that very much gives it away. Another Johnny Depp performance. But this may be one of the few films we get for a while because productions on many films have been halted due to the writers' strike that has now morphed into the writers/actors strike. This is blown out of, not proportion, but it's blown up in the studio's faces because they announced to the press, this was not an internal memo, they announced this to the press saying, we're going to drag these writer strikes on long enough until they start losing their homes, and then we'll give them the deal. And it had the opposite effect. It didn't dishearten them. It emboldened them, and it brought the SAG Guild, Screen Actors Guild, along with them. And here's the thing I didn't know. It facilitated an announcement from the president of SAG. I did not know this. Fran Drescher. The nanny is the head of SAG. I did not know this. And she gave a very impassioned speech about how this is bullshit and wrong and horrible, and how they can't plead poverty when they got billions and they're basically admitted as much. And I was thinking, how badly do you have to screw up to make the nanny angry at you? They fucked up big time.
Yeah, they're at the find out stage, and it's good to see. They talked about losing homes. Ron Perlman, Hellboy.
Oh yeah.
He went out and he responded to that and said, there's more than one way to lose your home, buddy.
I saw that. So. It was terrifying.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I don't want you to go to jail, Ron Perlman. Don't say too much.
If Robert De Niro can get away with saying he wants to punch Trump in the mouth.
That's right.
I think Ron Perlman could get away with that. And yeah, everyone is coming up against it. Ron Perlman, I think it was John Cusack. Because the reason why a lot of people are striking right now is because the studio's trying to bring in AI and further weaken job security, which is an all-time low in the film industry. But John Cusack is tweet saying, studios want to have extras work one day, scan them, own their likeness forever, and eliminate them from the business. And do you think it will stop with extras? It's came up with this idea basically where they scan an extra's face and use them after one day's filming permanently in background shots using AI and CGI, not having the actors turn up on day and get a week's worth of wages or however long it is. Just pay people for one day.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, and that's how some people get their foot in the door in the industry, and like closing off those ways. They're doing it with the writers too. So what they've talked about doing is maybe getting AI to write the basic story, and then you hire a couple of writers to come in and polish it up. And so, but now they don't get royalties anymore. Not that they are because of streaming, because streaming already cut the legs off their salaries by saying, oh, no, if you talk about reruns, you talk about songs played on the radio, you get a cut. And it's the same for musicians. But once it's streaming, now you're getting like fractions of pennies for every play. Like you get nothing. You'll get checks for $2, for $5 if you're lucky. And it's just, but you would think, okay, well, maybe back in the day they had commercials. So that's how these big companies made their money, was from commercials. There's not so many commercials now. Well, yeah, there are. And the second half of that is like people pay with subscriptions. And the third proof is that the stock prices keep going up and the CEO salaries keep going up. So you can't say that there's no money, right? Like, and yeah, they want to use AI to like do the basic scripts. But a lot of these writers, they get their start by being on set, so that if they have to change something in the writing, they can go in and be like, oh, that dialogue wasn't working. Here, send it to the writers. They'll do something else. And then they would get to see how a film production works. And so maybe they move into production, maybe move into directing. It's how they develop their craft. And when you take that away from any industry, when you take away how to develop the craft, that area where beginners can get their foot in the door.
When you remove upward mobility, there's no way to go up, and it leaves a big vacuum in the infrastructure of the entire industry. And what's so insane to me is a lot of people have been pointing out that this is very similar to a recent Black Mirror episode, and it seems like every time something weird goes on in late-stage capitalism, people reference Black Mirror. But quite a few years ago, I remember, because I watched this video by a comedian called Adam Buxton over here in the UK when I was in university studying screenwriting. And it was basically like, okay, so here's how you write a script. You go into the program, you bring it up here, and you say you want, say, a crime thriller, and then it generates the script for you. You put in the finishing touches, and boom, you have a script. And it was a satirical look at that's not how writing is done at all. And yet this is the reality that studios want. In 2010, it was a silly, parodic, satirical, brief sketch. Now studios want to make that reality. This is insane.
And what scares me too is that people's tastes are based off of what they're used to. So if people become accustomed to AI music, AI art, AI movies, AI stories, that's what they're going to want. And they're going to stop liking non-AI stuff. They're going to think that AI stuff's better simply because it's what they're used to. Right? Because that's what we like. We just like what we're used to. And
as hard as it is to set a trend, it's even harder to snap someone out of that trend once it gets established. That's why the strike is so important, because we need to cut the legs out of this ridiculous penny-pinching monstrosity the students are trying to push right now.
And I think solidarity is the solution. I think that's why it was genius what they did. I think other ones should join. Comic books have been having their own problem with AI. There were 2 art competitions recently. One was for, I think it was called like Bob the Magician or something. And they won an art competition. And the writer didn't know that what he commissioned was AI. He thought he was commissioning a person. And the person tried to say, no, I drew it. And they tried to show some examples. Turned out, nope, totally AI. Then there was another comic book competition to draw the main character of this comic book. And this guy's like, no, it's not AI. And they just tore him apart. You zoom in on the hands, you see second thumbs, or sometimes you just see like things that didn't line up. And if it was a human, it would line up. It's funny that a computer doesn't get that part yet.
Yeah,
I would think it would.
What I think that bothers me most about this is, for the past less than 5 years, we've had a big problem in the video game industry with NFTs and the blockchain and microtransactions, and some of that bullshit is still going on. But the consumer base, video game fans, stood up as one and basically says, we hate this shit, don't put it and in our games. And that's why NFTs are basically dead, even if they don't know it. And if that can happen in the video game industry, which, by the way, in terms of profit margins, far outstrips the film industry, it can happen in the film industry. We need, as you say, show solidarity. Other guilds need to get into this, comic book writers and TV guilds for actors and writers, and everything really, really needs to fully step up, because again, this is a fight against the 1%, essentially. And it's a very small amount of people who control the studios and have all the money. And when they see they're outnumbered, they are going to cave, because at the end of the day, they are fucking cowards who will follow trends. If they see the wind blowing another way, even if it loses them money, they might take a step back. But you've got to be hard with them. And fucking hell, we've got that problem over here in the UK as well. Not with writers and actors, because we've got different guilds for that over here, different communities for that sort of thing. But strikes are still ongoing in many public sector jobs, junior doctors and nurses and teachers over here. And the government has been trying to play hardball, but the government has been in power for so many years, people now know exactly who they are. And it's not going to fucking work. I'm not going to go into all of that, because otherwise...
the UK is a shame to see from here, because it's like, you guys are, I feel like, further progressed in some areas, and there's people trying to rip it back to be more like how it is here in America. Well, in terms of your healthcare, in terms of stuff like that. And it's just like... That's
been an ongoing process since basically the early 2000s. We consider actually, I say that actually been going on since the 70s, really. A lot of nationalization and increased privatization, and basically trying to strip apart the NHS bit by bit. And except when COVID happened, and it was like, hey, everyone clap for NHS staff workers and nurses and doctors, yes. And I said, the second this pandemic is over, they're going to go back to what they were doing before, and call me fucking Nostradamus, because I made a prediction.
I mean, I think the pandemic was a great example of seeing how private industry cannot rise to the occasion quick enough. And that the only way to do it is through a mass mobilization, and that takes government action. Like, you cannot do it.
Well, not even government action. It takes government action, yes, but also it takes community action, because we've got this thing over here in the UK.
Government as the weapon of the people.
Exactly, yes.
If it can be that.
We know sometimes it can, because my grandparents grew up in World War II, and they told me stories about the spirit of the Blitz and things like that, and how the children were all evacuated, rationing went into effect, but everyone, most people, helped out, dig for victory, communities sheltering each other, things like that. We pulled together as a nation. That's how the NHS got started in the aftermath of World War II. We realised our health service, people paying for basic healthcare, was not working anymore, and people desperately needed help. We formed the NHS in 1947, I believe it was, and we've had it ever since, and we are terrified of losing it. And it's a microcosm of all the different public sectors, or even the private sectors, industries that are under threat from these uber-capitalistic corporations. And I don't want to sound like I got a tinfoil hat on, but we do need to fight against it.
Oh yeah, they just want to discipline labor.
Exactly.
And if quitting your job means now you don't have health care, you're not going to be as likely to leave your job, right? If you have debt for college, you're not as likely to quit your job if it sucks because you still have college debt.
Well, then that's not employment. That's a hostage situation.
Yeah.
It's
insane. Capitalism's all about freedom, right?
Well, yes, I don't want you to hold the UK up to a pedestal or anything because we have a lot of the same problems you guys do. Here's the thing, the interesting because something happened, bit of history lesson. I am a tour guide, I talk about history. In the early 1900s, we basically founded the welfare state. It emerged out of a rejection of the workhouses from Victorian times. We basically said, look, this sort of stuff is not working anymore. We don't like that. We need to have a welfare state. Early in the 1900s, the beginning of the Liberal Democrat Party in down south in the UK government. They basically started doing that, and that helped lay the groundwork for softening the blow of World War I and World War II, further building on that, and then something shifted. We had more and more conservative governments trying to strip that away, or ineffective Labour governments, like, for example, Tony Blair, further eroding faith in more progressive liberal movements. We could go into all of that, talk about a whole thing about capitalism, but I think it's better just to show you an element of capitalism and have some ads. Check them out.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
We could talk about that stuff all day, but I want to talk about your comics because these are some really, really cool stuff you got on here. You got some really cool independent comics, and I want to fucking talk about it. But before we actually talk about the comics, the two main comics I want to talk about is Cosmo and Natalya and the Return of Jake Sunrise. Where he's returning from, I have no idea. But big question: so you talk about your job as a teacher, and I do want to talk more about that, but first what I want to ask is, how did you get into writing comic books?
Since I was like a little kid, I always got into trouble at school when I was really young, and that figures with the kind of kids I teach. But I stumbled on some comics somehow. It was a random issue of ElfQuest and an issue of Uncanny X-Men, the one where Wolverine is being crucified on the X.
Oh, yeah.
And those two books. And there was a G.I. Joe comic. It was and this kind of ties, I think, into, Jake Sunrise a little bit, that the other one was No Words, Snake Eyes by Larry Hama. I don't remember the name of the issue or the number, but that issue of G.I. Joe. It's just stuck in my head how he told a whole story with just images. And there weren't even sound effects.
Well, that's the thing, see, because it's so amazing, because the idea of sound effects and word balloons and thought balloons are so ingrained into, even people who don't understand comic books, into the idea of comic books. And yet, we have to remember, it is a purely visual medium. And there is no audio. It is just, any audio that's happening is happening in your head. So you don't need it. You can effectively tell. In fact, really, we've been doing that for centuries. Triptychs has been around for a long time. Hieronymus Bosch did that. So why not comic books?
Yeah, and I mean, and then as I got older, I was reading stuff like Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics.
I've got my copy.
Right. I read Watchmen, which didn't have any thought bubbles. Right. Just one thing it didn't have.
I was so into Watchmen when I was in school during English class. We were asked to bring in our favorite book. I brought in Watchmen.
I have smiley faces on everything to this day. And so then when I was in middle school, I was at the comic store and I got to know, kind of like we were talking about, renting videos and stuff and being able to like go to the store to get it or to go get a book at a store. In my comic store, I get to talk to the guy all the time about like, we'd be talking about, you know, this is the history of cable, and we'd be talking about the different parts of it. And he'd be saying, oh, do you know this? Do you know that? And eventually somebody recommended me Dark Sun, which is like kind of a spin-off of Dungeons and Dragons, sort of, or maybe like something like that. And the books, I really love them. I started reading it again recently. I'm on the second one out of the original 5. And it's just such a cool world. And it just felt so, they make it feel so real. But for me, with kind of how I am doing the stories, I mean, I guess they're different. You know, like for Jake Sunrise, I'm trying to get less, I'm not trying to world build quite as much. Whereas I think Cosmo and Natalya will kind of get its own sense of a world to it.
Well, with that sort of thing, you have to establish the world. The good thing about, and we're going to get into all of that in a second, the good thing about Jake Sunrise, I found, is that the world building happens very naturally in the background almost. It organically flows. Whereas with Cosmo and Natalya, you call it, with sci-fi, I find a lot of the time you kind of, at least with hard sci-fi, you have to set the rules early on. This is what's happened. This is what's possible. This is what's not possible. Let's now go on the fun adventure now that the groundwork has been made. But with Jake Sunrise, the Weird West sort of angle, at first, you don't really know that it's Weird West. At least with the first one I read, which was it was Dead Draw.
Yeah, that's the first issue.
The first issue. At first, you think this is going to be okay. This is going to be a somewhat creepy horror film, but still very much grounded, naturalistic, Wild West type setting. But then, hang on, what was that thing? Was that a normal? That's not a normal thing. Oh, and you build on that from that. But that's happening in the background a lot. And that, I really like that. I also like the other way you go with Cosmo and Natalya, but I'm always drawn to the more subtler elements of world building.
Yeah, it's you know, I groan at exposition, but I love it when it can just feel like it's already there. You know, like the original Star Wars films felt lived in, you know, and I don't feel like you ever got that really too much after that. Rogue One, too, just felt like a story. That could have been any story. It was a great story. But then it's in Star Wars. I mean, to me, that one felt like something that Hemingway might have written, because, you know, it doesn't end well for anybody. And that's Hemingway's bag.
Well, and it didn't end well for Hemingway either, so why should the stories be any different?
Yeah, he knew how he wanted his story to end, and he practiced it.
I mean, his whole life is a fucking shit show when you really look at it. If you ever go online, go onto YouTube and look up this comedian from Australia called Randy Feltface. It's a puppet, but
I hope so.
With a name like Feltface, what are you expecting? But here's the thing: he does this stand-up whole thing where it's a big long stand-up special where he's talking about this fictitious book that he's written. But there's a section of it I recommend where he summarizes the life of Ernest Hemingway in about 3 minutes, rapid fire. It's really, really cool, and you realize, holy shit, that's what Hemingway was like. Oh my god! But
he would appreciate the brevity, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Because there's a time for brevity, but there's also a time for luxurious long-form storytelling. And that's what I find interesting about you, Dean, is because the two books we're looking at right now, Cosmo and Natalya and Untitled Sunrise, in terms of tone, let alone writing, they couldn't be further apart.
Yeah, you know, like Jake Sunrise isn't really a comedy. There's not too much funny going on. It's kind of eerie. It's very, for me, it's impressionistic.
It is, honestly, for me,
it's like a dream.
I like that as a dream. For me, it is what archetypical Weird West should be. It evokes very much the spirit, at least the spirit that we have in our minds, this sort of a nostalgic element of what the Wild West was like, combined with the surreal, fantastical elements. In fact, it kind of reminded me a lot of some of the Witcher comics. There's a few comics about the Witcher out there, and I've read them. They're pretty good stuff, and some are direct adaptations, others are in original stories. And they feel very similar to the tone, like this sort of events unfolding in this very surreal environment that sucks you in and draws you in. You don't really know quite what's going to happen. And it's very surprising with that. Cosmo and Natalya, I'll be honest, I kind of saw some stuff coming.
Yeah, Cosmo Natalya is built around cliches, right?
Yeah, I'm so glad that was intentional.
Is a cliche.
Otherwise...
Everything about it, and there's always self-awareness going on too. You know, in both of those stories, I mean, like one thing that's big in comic books is like, you know, female objectification, and it's also how you sell them today. Even, you know, you go on Kickstarter, you see what sells the best, and it's always like the sexiest comics.
Speaking, you mentioned Image comics earlier. I used to be really into Savage Dragon, and I was reading a lot of Savage Dragon because I found it kind of fascinating. He's a superpowered character, but he doesn't want to be a superhero. He wants to be a police officer. Pretty cool. And I was reading some stuff on a train, and then I sort of stopped and thought, I need to put this stuff away. If someone looks over my shoulder and sees what I'm reading, they're going to think I'm watching fucking porn. It's really bad.
Some Savage Dragon.
I'm quite uncomfortable. I mean, not only am I asexual, I'm also British. So that's two levels of prudishness on top of each other. But even then, even without that stuff, it gets pretty bad and really uncomfortable, frankly.
I mean, even if you had some grand lady sitting next to you and you were reading Jim Lee's X-Men from the 90s, even some of that stuff in the swimsuit shots when they're just hanging out around.
Oh, God, I'm getting All-Star Batman and Robin flashbacks. Oh, no.
You know, like, so I tried to poke fun at it. The first issue of Jake Sunrise has like a real hot girl in it, but she uses that as a weapon.
As many women did
she uses
in the
it
1800s.
for her purpose. For survival. Not necessarily, she's not trying to like get one over on people. She's just trying to survive, and it's her tool, but it's also what people want her for half the time, you know. So it's a double-edged sword. And then Cosmo and Natalya, they're, you know, the stories that the Russians give up and realize that the, you know, Americans are getting to the moon first, with humans, and also that doesn't really matter. That there's really no great scientific discovery to come from that. It's just kind of it's a show. And so they're like, well, there's this planet X. Like, let's send someone there, but we got to cryo, you know, they're going to be in cryo sleep for 30, 40 years. And they're like, well, let's send a woman because this is going to be the future. It's going to be a different time. And also they have this uncomfortable eugenics program that, like, you know, may or may not have spun out of the Russian version of Project Paperclip that we had here in the U.S. Having
this is super uncomfortable.
Right, so like in the same way that the US brought Nazis here to do NASA, Russia did the same thing, you know. They had their half, the other half.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you said Planet X was the destination of this cosmonaut in the comic, I immediately thought, okay, so I know what I'm going. Here's the thing, I'm so glad you included that and you went for the tone you did, because then you look at a film like Fan Four Stick, which also has a Planet X. That's the name they give it, and yet it's just like, you can't fucking call it Planet X. I expect to see Leslie Nielsen be carried by fucking Robbie the Robot if you call it Planet X. Like...
Yeah, I mean, we're inspired by Flash Gordon, Barbarella. This isn't like, what is space like? This is, what did people in the 1920s think space was like? You know what I mean? This isn't like something trying to be realistic. It's more kind of poking fun at what our conceptions of space were like in the early days of it and what we thought the future was going to be like. But when the Cosmo Natalya gets to Planet X and wakes up from her cryo sleep, the USSR doesn't exist anymore.
Shit. Or should I say shitski?
So she never got woken up. Yeah.
Actual direct
and so
quotes.
instead, the Americans have gotten there. We do so much poking fun, and it's so corny. So, like, there is some, like, poking fun at Russians, but it's from an ignorant American perspective.
When it comes to poking fun at Russians, like, that's the best perspective.
We're not poking fun at Russia. Right, like we're poking fun at Americans poking fun at Russia based on what they don't know about it. You know what I mean? And based on the propaganda of the Cold War and the arms.
I got very much the vibe of that character from like, Captain Planet of the Planeteers, like the one Russian character, and she called everyone comrade and shit like that.
Yeah. And like, and that word comrade actually plays, that's like a pivotal plot point in the upcoming issues. And so the Americans, the only way they show up, because now they have advanced technology. So even though they didn't do the cryo sleep thing, they're there 30 years later because they got the technology, but it's not by NASA. It's sponsored by like 5 or 6 different corporations.
Oh God, it's Elon Musk.
That's where
God.
Right. And that was always my favorite thing about the Alien series. was how the Alien series addressed that. That like when humans go into Expanse did too, but like how when humans go to space, they want the alien. That's half of the story with all those movies. I don't know how many people. I assume people pick
exactly.
that up, right?
But here's the thing. What I love about those films are they keep on going after the alien no matter how many people it kills. And you think, wouldn't they just give up? And then you look at corporations right now poisoning people, doing all sorts of messed up shit, and still continuing on their things. And just like, I get it now. I get it.
The history of America, Jamestown, they found evidence of cannibalism. I mean, what they did with America was they just kept throwing poor people at it until they finally started surviving, and it was safe enough for everyone else to come over.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So, I mean, and I wouldn't doubt that space turns out the exact same way.
Yeah, it's not the great, glorious, golden future of humanity we promised in the 1920s, which makes it fun to look back at that kind of stuff and realize, this is sobering. But you get to have fun along the way. You get to have fun. Two things I really made me laugh out loud, actually, with this comic, Cosmo and Natalya, about this Russian woman shot into space, is there's a reference to the film Airplane, one of my favorite films of all time. So already I'm on board. And then the fact they call the alien dinosaurs when she lands on the planet danger chickens. This is the best description of dinosaurs ever.
Now, those are Randy. So, like, Cosmo and Natalya also feels different because, Jake Sunrise was something I developed with Josh Curley over, like, 20 years. We, like, fine-tuned it. And Cosmo and Natalya is something Randy had sort of in his bag, and he had some ideas about what he wanted to do. And he pretty much plotted out the 3 acts of the 3 issues we're doing. And then he was just kind of like, but I don't really know how to build it. I don't know how to make it something. So I came in and added certain elements of it, but those funny elements like Airplane, there's references to Firefly, there's references to the scene in Avengers where they're playing Galaga, and the Danger Chickens line. So how we work is a little bit like I used to hear Stan Lee would work with, the good side of how he used to work with Kirby. I think it was Kirby, where what they would do is Kirby would pretty much draw the comic, and then Stan Lee would come in and write the dialogue. But what we do is more like he did the outline, I came in and scripted it, he starts drawing it, and if he wants to add pages, he does. He adds certain dialogue if he likes it better this way, and then I'll go back and be like, well, what about this? You want to go that way with it, what about this line instead? And so it's more of a dialogue back and forth between the writer and the artist. Which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the process of working.
That's a very dynamic way of working.
It takes a lot of trust. And that kind of dynamism takes trust, and that trust is partially achieved through like a mutual appreciation for the craft of the other person. Like I like his art. I trust his perspective. He likes my writing. He trusts my perspective. So you know that you're in safe hands. So when somebody points out like, well, what about this instead? You don't take it so personal because they like your stuff. Plus they're good at what they do. So you want to hear what they have to say, and you don't kind of hold so tightly to your vision of it. And I think that's what's so great about comics. Comics aren't like writing a novel.
It's a collaborative experience.
It's like making
exactly.
a movie.
Because I hate auteurs. Like Hitchcock is great and all that stuff, but that's the exception to the rule, I find. More often than not, if you've got a single person with a single creative vision, it very rarely works. You gotta be able to work as a team. You gotta bounce ideas off other people and have them bounce ideas to you, and that can really work. That's why the Star Wars prequels don't work.
Right. It's like a meal. Like imagine a meal has all these different tastes in it, but when it's just one guy, like Quentin Tarantino's movies, it just all tastes like Quentin Tarantino.
It tastes like feet.
And I love Kevin Smith. I mean, I met the guy and I really I think he's amazing. But his favorite stuff to me is when I feel like there's other people getting involved in it. And my favorite Quentin Tarantino thing is True Romance. I don't know if you've seen that. Have you ever seen True Romance? And most people don't know he did it because he wrote the script. He didn't direct it. And it's got Christian Slater. It's got Patricia Arquette. Val Kilmer plays Elvis, the guy in the movie. He thinks he talks to Elvis when he's in the bathroom, in the mirror. and it's actually Val Kilmer. Brad Pitt plays his roommate that's a stoner on the couch.
Have I
It's
not
got a lot
heard
of
of this
famous
movie? Jesus
pop-ins in that
Christ.
movie, and
Okay.
old.
But see,
It's
this
from, like,
is
the early
thing,
90s.
You see, because Quentin Tarantino and, to a lesser extent, Kevin Smith, they do work with other people, but it's always the same people. They have the group that they like to make movies with, and they just make those movies. And because I wouldn't necessarily call Quentin Tarantino an auteur, but he's pretty damn close to it. And it can work, but as I say, best case scenario, it tastes all the same. Worst case scenario, it comes out an absolute mess. And equally on the other side of that, you got people who design projects, movies, TV shows, whatever, exclusively by committee. There's too many cooks in the kitchen, and that could also not work. So you've got a relatively small team. So Randy, I'm guessing that's R.W. Nunley.
Yeah, Randy's R.W. Nunley.
This is another thing I like about comics right now. You can be halfway across the world and still collaborate with people on one single comic. That's fantastic.
Oh, it's wild. It's wild.
And it's Kimberly Brum is the colorist, and Hafid. How do you pronounce their last name? Artie. Okay.
Artie, I think. It's funny because I've been talking with Hafid for over a year now, and I don't know if I say his name right because we don't actually talk. Like, we communicate in Facebook Messenger. So, like,
and
that's
how
in
the relationship. You can't ask how he pronounces his own goddamn name. It's too late.
And he's great. He seems like, I think he's in his early 20s. He's just coming up in comics. He's real eager. And he does all the stuff. He does all my flats for Jake Sunrise. He does all the flats for Cosmo and Natalya. And for anyone that doesn't know what flats is, you know, in the same way we lost inkers when we went digital with comics, because now it's just the artist does the lines. We gained flatters because now for coloring, you have someone who goes in and makes the different layers in Photoshop and is like, that's the hat. And he colors out the hat. So that way, when the colorist comes in, they don't have to define where the edges of the hat are to color it and to texture it and whatever they're going to do to it. So he goes in and sets up all the layers and objects. So when the colorist comes in, they can just grab it all and get it done a lot quicker and focus more on like the art of it rather than
takes the burden
getting
off
all the
of
lines
the
set out.
Like
Yeah, and speaking of apprenticeship kind of jobs, that's sort of an apprenticeship job. You know, he's working up to being a colorist. So Hafid I do 3 variant covers for Jake Sunrise. And he does the colors for the black and white cover, which is color. The cover's color. This one right here.
Capers at home can't see any of this shit, but I'm enjoying the hell out of it.
So like I don't know, that's okay. So like he'll do the colors on the vintage style. So like our black and white comic has like a wood pulp kind of texture on the inside, like printed into it. Because you can't get stuff printed on newsprint anymore. It's hard to find someone that's willing to do it. Because they have to have a whole different roller, I guess. And so I did the black and white because I thought that these artist lines are like so amazing. I wanted to like seclude that out, and it's horror, which has a different kick to it when it's black and white. And so the covers are all like vintage, where it looks like they're from like the 1950s style comic books. There's a different logo for Jake Sunrise. And I have the same artist, C.R. Florence. He does the covers for those. And then I do an art cover where it looks painted,
the Drew Struzan
kind of Indiana Jones movie.
Feel.
And
Struzan, I think is how you pronounce it.
What's his name? Drew Struzan. I didn't know that was his name.
He does a lot of great posters.
You see it on Star Wars too.
A lot of people confuse other similar styles of posters for his, and don't know how he feels about that. But it's a very iconic style, and which is really depressing because I look at all the movie posters we have nowadays, and very few of them have any sort of creativity. They're just reflections of the same sort of thing. And unfortunately, a similar thing I found has happened a lot with comic book covers as well. It's rare that you get a comic book cover that at least stands out to me. It can happen, but I suppose when you've got so many issues going on so many times, more than film posters, it is difficult to differentiate.
I think one of the big problems with comics that needs to be fixed going forward is like the audience perception of we look at comics as an audience member as like very disposable, very much we read it and we put it aside. And that's why I think in the 90s they tried to put that whole collector's fad on it to get everyone to like think that they're going to be worth something. But the value should be that the craft is so good.
That's why I
you wanna
keep
go
all of
back
my
for it and read it
comics.
again.
I've got a box
That's where the
of comics
value
that I
comes
keep.
from.
Yes, but I've also I mainly get like trade editions, just because I like having more than one comic in my hand. But also I can put them on a bookcase behind me, which you can't see. You can only see the big Phantom of the Opera mask because I'm a nerd.
And then you don't need the boxes where you're flipping. Although I have many fond memories of going through my comic boxes and like going like this, right? But it's nice to have it on the bookshelf where you can see the spine. And so that's the other big challenge as an indie creator is that like you need to have enough product. And I mean, if you're paying your artists what they should be getting paid, and right. And you know, sure. I mean, I guess part of the reason why I work with a guy like Hafid is in Indonesia, and the artist for the second issue is in Vietnam. The artist from the first issue is also in Indonesia. He's met up with Hafid, I think. And you know, then the colorist that I work with is in Argentina, and the artist for the third issue is in Italy. Some of that probably has to do with the page rate, but I mean, honestly, when I was looking for artists, I wanted to find a good artist. So I went around looking at who was available, found some guys that I liked, found the ones that said yes, which were like still on my top list because I didn't ask anyone I didn't want to work with because then I'm just wasting money and wasting my
some really good artists,
you know, with art I don't like. So I mean, I'm fans of all these guys, and like, you know, so it's expensive. Like one page of a comic should cost you, if you're paying a living wage to most of these people, if not all of them, it's in the area of 150 to 200 a page. 150 to 200 bucks per page, you know? So like a comic can cost anywhere from like $3,000 to $5,000 just to make one. And when you're thinking, well, I need 6 to 12 of them to make a graphic novel, right? You're talking like I need $60,000 to make a comic. So like, how are you going to pull that off? Because people don't really buy individual issues that much anymore. And that's why I use Kickstarter to try to like to get that money back as much as possible. But, you know, at the same time, I don't like really relying on other people. So in addition to teaching as a school teacher, I teach guitar on the weekends. This morning I taught guitar. At night I deliver pizzas, and I just squirrel away my cash. And I'm like, well, if I have to pay for all this book out of pocket, I don't care. That's what I'm doing because I'm making it. So, you know, like besides delivering pizzas and teaching guitar, you know, like having the comic is also its own job itself. So it's like I'm working 4 jobs, but it's what I want, you know, and it is hard work. But at the same time, like not everyone can even do that with hard work. They don't have that kind of cash. They got way more debt. Maybe they had a medical issue, you know, like, so I get people that don't have the money to do it. But my advice to anyone who wants to get into comic books is like, if you can do it, get some extra jobs, save up your money. Because especially if you're a writer and you think you're going to find an artist and go halfsies with them. First of all, you don't deserve half. I say that as a writer. I'm sorry. I could think of stories while I'm delivering pizzas. They can't be thinking of page layouts so much as while they're delivering pizzas. And then they still have to sit down and do it, where once I have it in my head, I can sit down and type it out, and that doesn't take that much time at all. I do need time to concentrate and a lot of time alone to think. But at the end of the day, the artist deserves a lot more of that money than you do as the writer. And if it's your idea, you should be paying everyone because that means you're the boss. So that means they all get paid and you should get paid last. Right. So I see so many people on Facebook, writers trying to find artists that are willing to work for free. And it's like, unless they're like under 20 and, you know, they're still in school, maybe they're just starting out in art school or like college, maybe they're in high school and you're a kid too. Maybe you could do it for free. But like once you got to pay rent, you can't be doing that to people. They got rent, you know, and
no. If you want them to actually do a job, because that's what it is. It is and always has been a job. Right back to cave paintings, we had to go, okay, let's get Clive the cave painter in to paint all these buffalo because he's the guy who does that. Oh, really? I'm the guy who does that? Okay, well then give me all your yak milk then. Like, you got to pay your artist. And I want to talk more about that after we have some more ads. So I want to start talking about Jake's Sunrise. Before we do that, I mean, I just want to congratulate you on the dedication you have to working with these different jobs, because it's just insane to me that someone has that many jobs just in general, just that many jobs, because especially as a teacher, because here's the thing, my mum is a teacher and she used to do the exact same job that you do, working with special needs children. And it's an incredibly, again, as we said before, emotionally taxing a job, but she never had to get another job, partially because she always had my dad who was also working. But in the UK, at least, it's very rare, as bad as the things are around here, and they are bad, very rare for people to have more than two jobs. For you to have four is insane to me. I just want to hug you and say everything will be all right.
I just didn't know how else to do it, and I didn't want anything to stop me. So I figured, and it can be tough. It can be tough because, there's times I can't do some of the stuff for the comic because I'm working the other jobs to pay for the comic. So it can kind of start bubbling up on itself, and it can be really stressful. But I told myself, it's only going to be 2 or 3 years. I just got to put my head down and do it. And then I can, take maybe some time off of writing and getting the art done and tour and do some conventions while I'm still teaching during the school year in the summers, try to push it and just see what happens. And for me, it's not so much that I'm trying to make it big or anything. I just want people to be able to see it and hopefully they like it.
Well, because the passion you put into it is evident on the page. I'll be honest, I didn't get hugely into Cosmo and Natalya. I thought it was kind of fun and cool, but it's not my kind of thing. Jake Sunrise very much is my kind of thing. I'm not a big horror guy, but I like what you did here. So, again, elevator pitch me Jake Sunrise.
So Jake Sunrise is a mute bounty hunter from the Old West. And this is a Weird West world where there's monsters, there's werewolves, there's Frankenstein-type creatures, there's zombies, vampires, and all that kind of good stuff. And it's kind of, because he doesn't talk, you only really get a sense of who he is from other people, from their experiences.
This is the thing that I really wanted to talk about, because it's rare that you see a silent protagonist on the page. In film and TV show, I'm sure that happens a fair amount of time, but on the page, it's very weird. Snake Eyes is one such example. And when I first realized that, wait a minute, this guy isn't talking, my thought process was...
That's really dumb. But he's so cool! But that's so dumb!
Then I realized what you're going for, and it is very much telling the story through side characters. I'm struggling to think of another instance where that's been done, at least in recent memory, at least to this degree of competency, skill, and creativity. It's fucking fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. I always liked Link, I guess, from Zelda as a kid. I wasn't a huge fan of the game, but I liked the idea of a character that just doesn't talk. And I loved Wolverine growing up, where you didn't really know which one of his old memories was real, which ones were fake. And, I wanted a strong male character because as a kid, comics did a lot for me. They got me into reading, but they also kind of helped me develop a sense of morality, outside of what I might have learned at home.
Same.
And that was a lot. And I want that for kids with the stuff that I write. I want, these aren't necessarily written for kids. For me, it's written for adults, but with the idea that kids could read it. Because a lot of stuff nowadays, adults go online, they go on Twitter, they go on wherever, and they whine about how the comics are heavy-fisted with the moral lessons and, are heavy-handed and ham-fisted. But they're for kids. They're written for kids, but they know adults are going to read it. And so then sometimes they put some jokes in there where you're like, that's really not appropriate for kids. But I think for me, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to write something that's for adults that kids can read, where instead of trying to put those jokes in there that keep adults paying attention, I'll just keep it fun so the kids might want to read it. But I'm also going to keep it pretty clean. I'm not going to get...
Well, a lot of adult stuff... People think adult stuff means dirty nowadays, which is ridiculous because, going back to something else, like, say, for example, Star Wars, you could argue, is quite kid-friendly, sort of got a broad appeal. But then you've got something like Indiana Jones, which has got creepy crawlies and beheadings and shooting and fucking Nazis and shit. And yet there's the face melting and stuff. There's very few like swears and objection material like we might consider now. And so, because I watched that stuff when I was a kid. It wasn't necessarily intended for me, but it was. I think the whole idea of demographics is fading more and more with each passing decade. And you're never going to have universal appeal for anything. That's just not possible. Tastes are too wide and varied. We're all individuals, blah, blah, blah. But you can do something like you're suggesting, which has appeal to both adults, but children can learn something from. And I think that really shows quite strongly in the first one, The Dead Drawer, because it opens up with this woman and being kidnapped by what appears to be a bunch of people from the film, like Wrong Turn or some shit, inbred hillbillies. Except for this one of them, who's got this name, Money, which never gets explained. And I like that it's never explained. And he's just like, he's a bit weird, he's a bit odd, but he's not a bad person. He just wants to get out of this pretty bad situation, even though he's one of the inbred hillbillies. And you can argue like, oh, it's like Sloth from Goonies or something like that. But again, they don't, much like you mentioned, you don't belabor that point. It's a very organic way of storytelling, mainly because when you've got a character that is silent, the silent protagonist, that gives more room for the side characters. People who often don't get as much time to grow, more room to grow. And you really get a huge sense of who they are, and you start to see the protagonist through their eyes. It's a very interesting, transformative way of storytelling. The more you read it, the more you get sucked into other people's worldview, rather than the main one, which is, it's a very strange way to read a comic, but it's very fascinating.
Yeah, and that's why I used a different artist is doing every issue, but the colorist is the same. So it's going to have a similar feel from issue to issue because the colors will have a sense of, like, Juan has a style. And that's also what I wanted. I picked someone who has a style, not someone who's just coloring. And so you can tell it's Juan when you see the different artists, but especially when issue 1 and 2, you know, they have very different styles, but they're not huge departures. Then when you get to issue 3, that one's going to be a gigantic departure. It's much more cartoony. It almost looks like an animation. And
I didn't notice that it was what it's called, the soft play.
Yeah, the circus one.
I really like it. Kind of reminded me of an episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's got a kind of that sort of vibe, that sort of thing, almost like an issue of Teen Titans, almost.
Yeah,
one of the more recent ones, and well, the ones that weren't trying to take themselves so seriously, you know, that kind. And I like that. I like that it was different because even though you got the same character, same returning character, Jenks Sunrise, which is a fucking fantastic name for a character.
But Josh Curley came up with that. He's got a way for names, man.
I want to talk about him in a second. But he's constantly going from story to story, but it's almost like he's traveling through different worlds almost. It's the same world, but he's going through all these different stories. And speaking of worlds, before we talk about Josh Curley, this is all in the same universe that's not necessarily related to something, the comics themselves. It's called Low Midnight of the Mind.
Yeah.
What the hell is that? And why is it such an awesome sounding name?
So, like, you know, Westerns always talk about high noon is when they have like their shootouts or whatever, right? So instead of high noon, it's low midnight. And it's of the mind because, to me, the Wild West was brutal for so many reasons. In the same ways that we were talking about how America was founded, like they just threw poor people out west and waited until they started establishing places that were stable enough for wealthier people to move themselves over there.
Oh, yeah.
And all the while, they're just extracting resources, you know, like the mines in the first issue. That's, you know, rich people trying to extract the resources out of the mines, and then look, now everybody's poisoned, and now it's affecting their DNA. And you know, the displacement of the Native Americans, just the racism, the Chinese Exclusion Acts, how they use them to build out the railroads. The Wild West was brutal, But telling that story today almost sounds like, you see a lot of white guys being like, oh, are they trying to make us feel bad or whatever? And
speaking as a British person, feel bad once in a while.
Right.
It's
maybe
the least you can do.
But, it's not about that because it wasn't us who did it and it's not us who can fix it. But to get that feeling, and I wanted to do it horror. That's why I decided to do this as a horror story, because I wanted it to be like a nightmare of the American dream, sort of, this is, and so in the background of all these stories, the biggest villains are human beings. It's not the vampires. It's not the werewolves. It's not the Sasquatch. It's just rich dudes pitting us against one another.
In that way, it reminds me very much of the video game Red Dead Redemption. They did the DLC Undead Nightmare, which is a bunch of zombies, and you can kill a bunch of zombies throughout the game, but a lot of the time, the worst people you encounter are the human beings.
There's a storyline version? I didn't know that.
In Undead, I think they did like a version for like the online version of Red Dead Redemption 2, but in the original Red Dead Redemption, it's a full storyline DLC. John Marston goes home to his wife and kid, but then suddenly the zombie apocalypse happened, and he's got to find a way to save his zombified family, accounting all the horrible characters you've met that survived in the previous main canon game and watching get devoured by zombies, while accounting new characters that surprise you with just how truly horrible they are. If you do nothing else, go online. If you don't want to play the whole game, go online and look up Undead Nightmare Herbert Moon, and there's this character called Herbert Moon, and he is possibly the worst character. It's just the most awful things in one scene you could ever wish to not hear. And you're thinking, zombies, dinner time. And
right, preferable.
It's
and for have you ever seen Walking Dead?
I have seen. I gave up after a little bit of while, but I stuck with
Me
it
too.
for longer than most people. Frankly,
I got like 5 seasons deep, I think, before I stepped.
I was
aside.
a huge. I realized that I had become a huge Walking Dead apologist, but I didn't actually like the show anymore. I was just defending it for the sake of defending. But it's character driven. It's character driven, but nothing's happening.
Right, and to me, it also became kind of like fear porn at some point, where it was like you put people in such scary situations, and like just to get that visceral feel, and like I want fear to be more than that. And my stories they're horror, but it's not necessarily scary. I would love to do scarier stories with Jake Sunrise at some point. I want each kind of mini series with Jake to have its own sort of vibe to it.
Horror
like
is not fear; it's atmosphere. Exactly.
Right, atmosphere. And the return to Jake Sunrise is called that because I wanted it to feel like it's a dime store novel, sort of. And then there's a sort of meta moment in the first issue of Jake Sunrise in the Dead Draw, where Money, who's a book nerd, because he's hanging out with all these his idiot inbred family, and he's literate, so he's reading all these books. He has a book that is about Jake Sunrise. And so that's who knows his name. He's like, oh, I know you. I've read a book about you. Because cowboys were sort of like the pirates of their time in the sense that there were books being kind of written about them while they were there, while they were ongoing. Yeah, even though it was just a short 20, 25-year period of time where all the real magic happened. Yeah. But as Americans, we're always drawn back to it. And I think it spans beyond America, this idea of pirates and on the high seas and this idea of cowboys, because we like the idea of how the hell can we get out of this horrible civilized society how do we break free of these constraints?
It's people who are shaped by these ideas of society and either actively or passively try to break away from them. The cowboys, stuff like that, even though that's very much a lot of cowboys were just like ranchers, and other people were lawmen working very much within the boundaries of the law until they suddenly were to look up the Up brothers. They did some shit. But,
these were not good people, a lot of them. And that's the story with Jake too, is he's not a good guy, but he's not a bad person. And I think a lot of us can relate in that sense.
Do you know what he is?
Oh no, he's hot!
I'm not just saying that because he's a werewolf. Anyway.
Right? No, I mean, and that's part of the story. The first issue, I picked which artists for the different issues based on stuff that I saw. And the first issue, I got Bray to work on that because I'd seen how he drew women. And I was like, oh my God, I need you to draw this story. I need a story with a woman to be the first one because that's kind of people will see that and it might draw some people
Oh
in.
my lordy, I'm just a female woman here and been converted by this savage. Whatever, I'm gonna.
Right, so she even plays decoy for me as the creator trying to get people to buy it. She never gets out of that decoy role.
Times change, nations rise and fall, but exploiting women remains the same. I'm going to find a way to exploit that exploitation.
Think exactly, because what else are they going to do? You know, but like think of like Wolverine. You see, some artists would draw him like as a super ugly dude, and some dudes would draw him. Some people would draw him as like a hot guy. And he could either be 5 feet tall and look like an ugly mug that's had his nose broken 5,000 times, or he could look like a 6 foot tall hot guy.
Which makes it's incredibly hilarious to me because I know the point you're making, but the original concept for Wolverine was he was going to be a blonde teenager.
No, I did not know. I've never
look up
that.
Google original concept designs for Wolverine. It's like night and day. Oh yeah.
Oh god.
Obviously they didn't go with that.
Right.
But the point you were making.
Well, and for me, what I wanted to do was make it that since this is from the perspective of people, the side characters, how would this woman see Jake Sunrise? She'd seem as like she's kind of hot, you know? So like he looks kind of hot in the first issue. In the second issue, he looks older and he looks almost more grizzled. But that's because the guy who's looking at him is like a 20-year-old Irish guy.
Yes.
And he kind of looks up to him maybe as like an older brother figure, like a father figure. Look at this tough guy who also is a bounty hunter like me. And then the third issue,
that story. The second issue I really, really liked because I read Cosmo and Natalya first, and then I got on to Jake Sunrise, and with that description of the female character in the first issue, Jake Sunrise, I was worried like, are we gonna have an uncomfortable talk in the interview? But then you go on to the second one, and I realized, okay, no, you actually know what you're doing, especially with that Irish character. I'm not going to spoil anything, but let's just say,
love knows no gender.
Yes, exactly.
And
it's so hard to teach people lessons as a teacher because if they know you're trying to teach them something, they're going to close themselves off to it, or you're only going to be speaking to the choir. So you have to be subtle in what your message is, and you have to have it feel natural. It can't feel artificial. People don't like being spoken to in that way. You know, you have to be authentic.
You know what I found as a tour guide? Because my whole job is to talk at people and describe things to them. And some people are amenable to that and some people aren't, even if, you know, sometimes we bring kids on board. I find, and feel free to disagree with this, I find one of the best ways to engage with people and to teach them something is actually to ask them questions. Ask them, what do you think this is? What do you think happened? How would you react to this sort of thing? And that you can't really do that when you've got a silent protagonist. But the sense I got in the issue was that Jake presented himself to this character as someone that he could open up to. In the first issue, it was very much a question of survival. People were making assumptions about him, talking about him, but he was just like, let's get out of here. Let's fix this situation as well it should be. That was the right position to have in that issue. The second one, though, just sits and just listens to the guy. He listens. He gives him the opportunity to open up, which
work through his own things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, too many times as men, and I think women probably do it too in modern society. But like, we hear someone's problems and we want to fix it for them. We're like, oh, you should try this. Why don't you do this? Where 90% of the times what people want to hear is, wow, that sounds good or that sounds bad, depending, you know.
You don't want to go to a therapist like, how does that make you feel?
Right. They just want you to say, I hear you, you know, and as
it's
somebody
called
who
active
just
listening,
listens,
not active problem solving.
Right. And, you know, he's also helping them with real world stories at the same time. And, you know, as we go through the different stories, you start to get a better sense of who Jake Sunrise is. But the first two issues are told sequentially, and you could tell because his vehicle's the same in the first and second issue, his bounty wagon.
Yeah. It reminded me of the one from Django Unchained without the big tooth at the top.
Yeah. And the third issue, you learn where he got it from because these 6 issues aren't sequential.
Yeah.
So they don't actually happen in order. And the tough thing about writing that story is because I wanted character development over the arch of the 6 stories, over the whole arc of it. But I didn't want to tell the stories in order. So I have to remind myself when I'm writing it that this is where Jake is at in his mind at this part of the story. Because by the end of the 6 issues, which actually isn't the 6th issue, right? Like, actually, no, wait, issue 6 is the 5th issue sequentially, if that makes sense.
I know what you mean. I mean,
and then what I had to do to tie the time to people without being explicit is he has like a hole in his hat, right? And in one issue, you find out where did he get that hole in his hat. And in one issue, in the first issue, he has a bounty wagon that is red and yellow. And it's like, well, why is his bounty wagon red and yellow? And you find that out in one issue. And in one issue, he gets a bow and arrow. So if you see him with a bow and arrow in a different issue, it's like, oh, that's after this story. So by seeing what items he has, you get a sense of what order these stories must have occurred in. And then when you do that, you kind of get a sense of how his character developed and how he's becoming a better person. Because it's also Return of Jake Sunrise and that he's kind of coming back to who he was. Because I think sometimes when we go through a
broken person being made whole.
Yeah, because I think when we go through traumatic experiences, we often do things to ourselves to survive it. And then when we maintain those changes, that's when a lot of problems happen. You know, I think sometimes getting drunk can help you get through a rough patch. But if you keep getting drunk after the rough patch is gone, now you're an alcoholic.
The cure becomes the disease.
You know? Yeah.
And considering how he's, let's say, medicated himself in that...
you picked up on that too.
yeah. Well, I know, like, Victorian literature and stuff like that in comics. I've read Alan Moore. Like, I know what that is going on. We're not going to spoil too many things. And
that fits in with the metaphor of him as a werewolf.
Indeed. And there's both metaphorical and literal, because that's the best kind of werewolf stories. Take note, fucking Hollywood, when you're allowed to make movies again. Take fucking note. And I like that you do that, though, because it doesn't feel like you're compensating for the character being silent and not having thought balloons. It feels like it's just, this is an additional fun thing you get to experience because of that. It's a feature, not a bug.
Sure. Oh, yeah. And I think the only bad thing sometimes I'll contact the artist and I'll be like, can you change the facial expression here? And that happens not all the time, but I've definitely had artists be like, you're pretty particular about the facial expressions. I'm like, well, he doesn't talk. So, and at one time,
need that. If he's like,
sometimes my directions can be too exact. Like I think in one panel I said he looks incredulous, and it's like, what the hell do you mean he looks incredulous? What's an incredulous facial expression? I was like. So I had to find a picture and sent it. I was like this facial expression.
I need him to look like he's a coy Dutch woman guarding a secret.
Someone from a Vermeer painting, perhaps.
His smile was like that of the Mona Lisa, subtle yet hot in the face. I don't know. You have to be exact for that, and that does work, and that's why it works so well when you establish, as you say, that relationship of trust. With yourself and the artist and the colorist and things like that, because it ends up rewarding them. Because if you've got an artist who knows what they're doing, you'd have to, if you pay them properly, then they do know what they're doing, then they can figure that out from descriptions. Incredulous, I would say that's probably a bit vague, actually.
Yeah.
You could probably go the other way.
That one's on me.
But why is he incredulous? But I tell you what's going to be incredulous about right now. You got yet more ads. Check them out. So create this character, Jake Sunrise, with Josh Curley, and name not spelled how I imagined it pronounced. But how did that happen?
Man, him and me, I've known him since high school. We were best friends all through high school, best man at his wedding, stuff like that, and. Wow. You know, he loves drawing, and his drawings I always loved his ideas and his perspective on how he came up with stuff. And we would always bat around ideas. And one of the ideas that, he once showed me like a couple drawings. It was like 2 or 3 drawings. And he was like, here's this idea. It's like Mexican cowboy named Jake Sunrise who turns into a werewolf. And I was like, that's awesome. So then I was like,
that is awesome.
What? And so I didn't want to put my words into his characters' mouths at first. So I was like, what if he doesn't talk? And he was like, yeah, that could be cool. And so then, I started to develop out the idea of the costumes. I'm trying to remember which one of us came up with the idea for his pouch, which holds his like secret to keeping the wolf at bay, or
the little pouch around his neck, little thing. As soon as that was taken off him in the first issue, I thought, "Ooh, that's significant. That's Chekhov's pouch right there."
Yep. And that one's always coming back into play a little bit like Indiana Jones's hat, sort of. He's got to have it with him.
It's a talisman almost. On a character level.
It's his addiction. He stores his kit in his pouch. So that's really his secret, and we all have that secret we keep close to our chest that like when it gets too far away, we kind of feel vulnerable and then we become more agitated. And I
have absolutely no idea what you mean while I'm wearing 3D glasses that I wear for every single podcast. I couldn't tell you. I could not tell you.
Very transmet. That's what I was thinking when I saw them.
Everyone says it was transmet performance. It's completely different styles.
Yeah, very different style shades.
Can't go anywhere these days.
But the colors.
Ever since I started shaving my head, it's been a bit of a problem. But oh god.
But yeah, Josh, and the story him and me originally came up with was much less action driven and much more drama driven and
introspective.
Much more introspective. It was all going to take place on a ranch, and to me, that's still the story. This is after all of that. This is his
the
return.
Low midnight
you know what I mean?
Of the mind.
Yeah, because what happens? I don't know if you've ever read any Douglas Adams, but
Excuse me. How dare you even suggest of questioning a red-blooded British man of not having read Douglas Adams? He's my.
I hope
he is tied with Neil Gaiman as my favorite author of all time. Okay,
he's the only guy who's ever made me laugh out loud from written words.
Oh, he can do that. Douglas Adams can do that.
I don't know. I think it would take a lot to make me scared from reading a book. Make me laugh out loud.
In that case, then what you want to do is you want to read Terry Pratchett.
Ooh, I've heard of him. I should check that out.
Terry Pratchett is well known. He's collaborated a lot of times with Neil Gaiman. He has since sadly passed away, unfortunately. But he is beloved, at least over here in the UK. He's wrote a lot of great books, some for kids, some for adults. But there's a great series of books here called Discworld. Fantasy novels set in this whole one place called the Discworld. It's great. But what he does is he not only does he go to tackle great social issues in very amusing ways in a lot of his books, but also he will occasionally dip into slightly more horrific elements. I'm going to read something to you right now. I'm going to have to look it up so I get the quotation right. Just so
I was going to say, because I never knew him as a horror writer. I didn't know what he wrote. But
he's not really a horror writer, but he will write something that is occasionally horrific. At least this bit is for me. And this is from a book he did called Lords and Ladies in the Discworld novels. And it goes like this. Elves are wonderful. They provoke wonder. Elves are marvelous. They cause marvels. Elves are fantastic. They create fantasies. Elves are glamorous. They project glamour. Elves are enchanting. They weave enchantment. Elves are terrific. They beget terror. The thing about words is that meanings can twist just like a snake. If you want to find snakes, look for them behind words that have changed their meaning. No one ever said elves were nice. Elves are bad.
Ooh, I like that. That's pretty cool. That's really awesome.
It's that kind of thing.
I love wordplay, and that's what you have to do. I mean, that's what Douglas Adams would do. He'd say stuff like, that the ship hung up in the sky the exact way a brick doesn't.
Yeah,
or something
yeah,
like
exactly.
That. Yeah. So I love how he can make you laugh out loud just by how he's looking at something. And it's really hard to do that. And I think a lot of it comes from wordplay. It comes from how you play with the words while you're writing your story and how you kind of you almost have to take a perspective where you're seeing things from a dark angle, but in a funny way. And that's why sometimes he could say some really depressing stuff, Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
You know, if I had found
don't
out
talk
one
to
day
me about life.
his death was really tragic, but, you know, fortunately it wasn't suicide, but I wouldn't have been surprised based on some of his stuff I read if it had been. Because I bet he did struggle. My guess is he struggled with depression, even though he was very funny.
Quite possibly, but don't forget that. I think that might be a bit of the British mindset as well. I'm not trying to stereotype my own nation.
I just think all British people sound suicidal.
Well, we have to approach a lot of things. We basically, because there's such a like anti-therapy thing over here, we often have to do our own therapy through our stories, and we process little things that annoy us in that way. Douglas Adams does that, Neil Gaiman does that, Terry Pratchett does that, and many other great writers do that for their stories. Little things about our lives that can blow up in big ways, and we explore that through the words and how words can twist, exactly as you say.
Well, like you were saying, the little things. So the Douglas Adams quote, I was thinking of it, is something like, when you've taken as many baths as you can justifiably take in a given day, and you reached the long, dark tea time of the soul.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, been there.
And that must have inspired me with the title Low Midnight of the Mind. It's a totally different feel. I'm not going to be, but like, I'm sure that somewhat inspired me when I came up with that title for this world.
Because people aren't as clever in the word. They're not even like clever. It's almost like they're afraid to explore that sort of thing for a risk of alienated people. But when you say the long, dark tea time of the soul to a British person, even if they don't know anything about Douglas Adams, they're going to have a pretty good idea about what you mean.
Just from that alone.
At least they'll have a guess towards it. And
right?
you can explore different ways of wordplay and storytelling, and you kind of have to do that because we're not telling any original stories around here. We're telling the same 5 stories we have done since the dawn of time, ever since Clive the Cave Painter. So you've got to find new ways to express the same ideas, and that's hard. But you can do that. And I know that because that's exactly what you've been doing. And at least with Jake's Sunrise, and it works really well, really fucking well in that way. And that's why you got a Kickstarter going, haven't you?
Yeah, and how I'm doing my Kickstarters is like I'm on the second issue, but if you didn't get the first issue, you can get it as an add-on. So if you missed out the first round, you can still catch it. And we just finished up our Cosmo Natalya Kickstarter yesterday.
Oh, yes.
Which did great. I mean, we raised twice as much as we were looking for. And so you can even get that too. So if you want to get that, you can also get that as an add-on with Jake Sunrise. Me and Randy are flirting with the idea of sometime in the distant future having a crossover event, which... It's going to take a lot of work to combine those two different types of worlds together, but I'm sure we can pull it off.
Cowboy werewolves,
right?
I mean, I'm up for that.
It's that classic story: Soviet cosmonaut meets, Mexican cowboy.
Well, you know what? A lot of independent comics do that. Like, it's rare that you don't get an issue of like Vampirella crossing over with the Green Hornet or something like that.
Right?
That's happened before multiple times in many different ways, so you can do that. I
love superheroes. I do, but I'm not right now at all interested in writing anything about superheroes. There's enough of them out there. There's a lot of that out there.
I've been looking at so many different super things because I love Marvel. I'm a huge Marvel fan, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't read that many Marvel comics recently just because I kind of want different things. And so if I see a Marvel comic that looks really different to me, I'll go and grab it immediately. But if it's the same kind of thing, I'm just like, I don't need to read this really. That's why I look for other things. And recently I got a bit disappointed because I started reading this series, Astro City by Kurt Busiek. I don't know how that...
Yeah, Kurt Busiek.
And at first it was kind of intriguing, but then, because it's sort of like an anthology series about this brand new city with all these different kinds of superheroes, and they act like they've been around forever, and we just have to sort of dive into this world. It's great. But then it just got wrapped up in a lot of the tropes that I'd seen before, and maybe I should have pushed further with it a bit better. But I did.
No, I think you're right, because he's trying to kind of play with these different tropes, but like put a what if it was real sort of thing, and I feel like that's already kind of been done before.
Well, not even that. It felt like I like when it felt it real, because like, there's in the early issues, there's this one where it's like this family of superheroes clearly pastiching the Fantastic Four, and they've got this really young child character who's like a super genius, but she's all like a superhero. But then she kind of like just wants to go to school and stuff like that, and that was really fascinating. I loved that, and I love the way that they did that.
Did you read the one where there's like the Superman analog, and he goes home every day just counting how many seconds he got to fly?
No, I haven't got that far. That's sort of stuff.
A good story.
That sounds fucking fantastic. But then they brought in this whole thing like this alien invasion and stuff like that, and this one psychic character figuring out that his superhero mentor was a vampire, and it wasn't bad in any stretch of the imagination. It's good writing. Don't mistake me. But I didn't need to read that. I wanted to read about the Superman character who counts the seconds he can fly because it's so fantastic. Or the kid character that just wants to be kind of a normal kid in a superhero world. And shit like that. And that's... at first I got that, but then I kind of didn't. And so that's why I'm drawn so much towards these sorts of stories that you're doing, because even if we are telling the same 5 stories over and over again, they feel different. Because you can't auto-generate these stories. AI does not work that way. You can't make capitalism, blah, 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 force you to tell those kind of stories. I just want an excuse to play this clip.
It's not because of Brexit, it's not because of Brexit, this is not our fault.
I thought, like, should I save that for later on? And then I just ran out of opportunities, so it's like, fuck it, I'm just going to include that. And so that's why I highly encourage the Capers go and check out this Kickstarter for the return of Jake Sunrise. When is that going to go live?
It's going live next Friday. So I don't know what the number on the day is. What is that? The 22nd? 21st. So it's going to go live on the 21st. I'm only looking to raise $1,000 for this one. Since people can get their first and second issue and a third issue if they want, I'm hoping it won't be that hard. There's if I can hit the same goal that I got last time for the first issue, we raised $2,500. And that was awesome. So for this, and like I said, these issues cost me around like $5,000 to make. So I'm trying to make back like hopefully at least half of my expenses so I can get on to the next one sooner. But this second issue took a long time. So fortunately, I could pay a lot of that off as I was going. So I just want to get it out there and in people's hands. So it's only going to be a 2-week Kickstarter. I'm only looking for $1,000. I want to get it out there. And then when I get to my next Jake Sunrise Kickstarter, I'm going to do 2 issues at the same time in one bundle, 2 new issues. So if you don't catch this Kickstarter, you can catch the next one. You can get all 4 issues at the same time.
Next Jake time, same Jake channel.
And, I'm only printing 100 copies of each. So if you think these are good, they might be collector's items. Who knows?
This is the fucking collector's item here, people.
Right. I wouldn't want you to buy it as a collector's item. I want you to buy it because it's good.
Yeah.
But it's intimate. It's small. And that's how I want my stories to feel. And that's why I'm not printing a whole ton. I don't want to have a warehouse of comics where I'm trying to fling them out. I want to get all 6 stories together so that people can get their hands on a graphic novel.
They feel like curated intimate stories because they are curated intimate stories.
Yeah.
And frankly, we need more of those. Because again, going back to the whole British thing, we don't often do long-form storytelling over here, at least in terms of TV. We've got Doctor Who and shit like that, and soap operas, but for the most part, we've got miniseries and smaller things, and we like it that way because it feels a bit more contained, and we can just relax ourselves into this space for a moment and enjoy it for that moment it gives us, and it feels more personal, feels more alive, feels more organic, and that's what we need from our storytelling. So I hope you keep on doing that for a long time to come. Whenever you're able, don't run yourself ragged delivering pizzas while taking care of America's youth. Please don't do that.
Thanks.
No worries. Yeah. On that note, I think it's about time we end the show. Anything else you want to talk about quickly before we wrap up there, Dean?
No, that's really good, man. Thank you for having me on. It's been really great. It was really good talking to you.
I'm glad you had a good time. And if you enjoy the show, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. And if you haven't already, go back and listen to other super episodes. I know it's been a while since we've done some episodes. We've had a lot of technical issues recently. Most of them have been resolved. And so we're going, I probably made this point before. Hopefully we're going back to semi-regular episodes from now on. Previous episodes, we've talked about lots of people from the independent comic scene. Go to listen to some of them. And you can listen to the show on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all good podcast apps, or a place to hang your cape.com. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our logo, the lovely microphone, the red and blue 3D glasses, those are mine. And thank you for listening. This has been Podcapers, the official podcast for a place to hang your cape. Cue the music!